I was 17 when I first stepped aboard Apex Nexus, the greatest scientific station in the known galaxy. Orbiting the brilliant white star Nerus, it was less a station than a city among the stars. Towering habitats, shimmering gravity rings, and thousands of alien ships surrounded it in silent motion. My father, Ambassador Daniel Parker of the United Earth Federation, walked beside me with practiced confidence while I struggled to hide my amazement. Representatives from dozens of civilizations filled the immense corridors, many belonging to species that had explored the galaxy for tens of thousands of years. Humanity, by comparison, had only recently reached the stars. We were respected enough to receive an invitation, but not enough to be taken seriously. As we entered the Grand Scientific Assembly, every eye was fixed on a mysterious silver sphere suspended at the chamber's center. The legendary quantum core of the architects, a device no civilization had managed to activate in 5,000 years. My father guided me toward the section reserved for the younger civilizations. It wasn't an insult, it was simply the order of the galaxy. The oldest races occupied the seats nearest the center, where every word carried weight earned over millennia. Humanity sat several tiers higher, among species that had only recently joined the interstellar community. I understood why. Compared to civilizations that had mastered faster than light travel before humans had discovered agriculture, we were little more than newcomers. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that every glance in our direction carried the same quiet judgment. We were here to observe, not to contribute. The chamber itself was breathtaking. Above us, the domed ceiling projected a living map of the galaxy. Stars flickered as shipping routes shifted, exploration vessels reported discoveries, and colonies transmitted updates from worlds thousands of light years away. At the exact center floated the object that had brought everyone together. The quantum core rotated slowly within concentric rings of pale blue energy, its polished surface covered with symbols that seemed to rearrange themselves every few seconds. No one knew what language they represented. No translation system had ever decoded them. A calm voice echoed across the chamber as the session officially began. The first speaker, an elder scientist from one of the founding civilizations, approached the central platform with absolute confidence. For nearly an hour he explained a new activation theory built upon quantum harmonics, dimensional resonance, and gravitational synchronization. The mathematics was astonishing, yet when he finally initiated his simulation, the quantum core remained completely motionless. Not even the faintest pulse appeared. The scientist lowered his head, thanked the council, and quietly returned to his seat. No one seemed surprised. It was simply another brilliant attempt added to 5,000 years of failure. Yet as polite applause filled the chamber, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was searching for the answer in exactly the same place. One presentation became 2, then 5, then 10. Every researcher who approached the central platform carried centuries of work and the confidence of an entire civilization. Some proposed that the quantum core required impossible amounts of energy. Others insisted it responded only to precise gravitational frequencies or exotic particles found near collapsing stars. Each theory was elegant. Each demonstration was flawless. Each result was exactly the same. The silver sphere continued its slow, silent rotation as though none of them existed. Around the chamber, disappointment never turned into frustration. These scientists had lived with failure for generations. Another unsuccessful attempt simply became another entry in an archive already thousands of years long. I stopped paying attention to the complicated equations and began watching the people instead. Every speaker used different formulas, different instruments, and different terminology, yet they all behaved as if they were solving the same kind of puzzle. They believed the quantum core was locked, and their task was to discover the correct key. Nobody questioned that assumption. Nobody asked whether the architects had designed the challenge differently. It was as though 5,000 years of agreement had transformed a theory into unquestioned truth. I leaned toward my father and whispered, "Has anyone ever tried proving they asking the wrong question?" He looked at me with a faint smile before answering, Many have suggested new approaches. That's not what I asked. His smile faded slightly. No, he admitted after a moment. Not exactly. I returned my eyes to the floating sphere. The symbols across its surface shifted again, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate before dissolving into new arrangements. The core wasn't resisting anyone. It wasn't reacting at all. That bothered me more than another failed experiment. If every civilization in the galaxy had reached the same conclusion independently, perhaps intelligence wasn't the problem. Perhaps thousands of brilliant minds had simply inherited the same assumption, repeated it for centuries, and never realized they were all standing inside the same invisible box. The next presenter was introduced as High Scholar Sarek of the Aurelian Collective, a civilization that had studied the quantum core longer than humanity had existed as a species. His reputation alone silenced the chamber. Every delegate leaned forward as he activated an intricate holographic model that surrounded the ancient device with thousands of glowing equations. The simulation predicted perfect resonance, flawless synchronization, and complete compatibility with every known law of physics. If anyone could succeed, it was supposed to be Sarek. He raised one hand and began the activation sequence. The chamber fell completely silent. The blue energy rings surrounding the quantum core brightened for a single heartbeat before fading back to their normal glow. The silver sphere continued its slow rotation without changing speed or emitting a single additional signal. The simulation collapsed into scattered points of light, and another theory that had consumed centuries of work quietly joined the endless list of failures. No one gasped. No one seemed shocked. Instead, the delegates politely applauded, thanked Sarek for his contribution, and immediately prepared for the next presentation. Watching them, I realized they no longer expected success. They expected refinement. Every failure was treated as another small step toward the same destination, never as evidence that the destination itself might be wrong. I lowered my notebook onto my lap. Not a single page contained an original assumption. Every equation, every experiment, every proposal was built upon foundations laid by scientists who had lived thousands of years before. Entire generations had inherited those ideas without questioning them because the civilizations that created them were considered beyond doubt. I glanced at my father again. They trust their history more than their curiosity, I whispered. He looked at me for a long moment before quietly answering, when knowledge survives for thousands of years, questioning it becomes harder than accepting it. His words stayed with me as another speaker approached the platform. For the first time since arriving at Apex Nexus, I wasn't wondering how to solve the quantum core. I was wondering why nobody seemed willing to imagine that the architects might have wanted someone to think differently instead of thinking better. Another hour slipped by as the parade of celebrated experts continued. Every civilization presented its finest theories with absolute confidence, and every attempt ended in quiet disappointment. The council had perfected the ritual of failure. A scientist would step forward, unveil decades of research, activate a magnificent simulation, and watch the quantum core remain unchanged. Respectful applause always followed, never ridicule. These were the greatest minds in the galaxy, and no one questioned their brilliance. Yet brilliance alone had accomplished nothing for 5,000 years. I found myself studying the faces instead of the equations. Some delegates looked exhausted, others determined, but almost all shared the same expression whenever another experiment failed. It was acceptance. They behaved as though the answers certainly existed somewhere within their established methods, hidden beneath one final calculation that had simply not been discovered yet. No one seemed willing to abandon the framework itself. My eyes drifted back to the ancient sphere. Its shifting symbols reminded me less of a machine and more of a teacher waiting for a student to notice something obvious. I couldn't explain why I felt that way. It wasn't evidence. It was instinct, the uneasy feeling that appears when every intelligent person in the room agrees a little too completely. The next speaker concluded, and another polite wave of applause echoed beneath the enormous dome. Before the moderator could announce the following presentation, I quietly leaned toward my father once again. They all solving different equations, I whispered, but they asking exactly the same question. He folded his hands without looking at me. Careful, Ethan. I am serious. I know you are. So why doesn't anyone challenge the assumption? My father finally turned his head. Because these assumptions were built by civilizations older than recorded human history. Around here, tradition carries almost as much authority as proof. I looked around the chamber once more. For the first time since arriving at Apex Nexus, I realized the greatest obstacle before the quantum core might not be the machine itself. It might be 5,000 years of unquestioned certainty. The moderator announced a short recess before the afternoon session. Conversations immediately spread across the immense chamber as delegates gathered in small circles, discussing equations, failed simulations, and theoretical refinements. I wandered toward one of the observation windows overlooking the quantum core. Up close, it seemed even stranger. The blue energy rings never fluctuated randomly. Every movement appeared deliberate, almost rhythmic, as though the machine was patiently repeating the same silent message to anyone willing to notice it. A group of senior researchers stood nearby. They spoke with complete confidence, debating which mathematical constant had been overlooked in the latest presentation. Not one of them questioned whether mathematics itself was the obstacle. They argued over methods while sharing the same conclusion before the discussion had even begun. Listening to them felt like hearing different musicians perform the same melody in different keys. My father joined me a few moments later. You've been unusually quiet, he said. I am thinking. I can see that. I glanced toward the ancient device. Do you know what bothers me most? What? They keep saying the core refuses to activate. And what if it isn't refusing anything? He frowned slightly. Explain. What if it's working exactly as it was designed? Everyone assumes it's a broken machine waiting to be repaired, or a locked system waiting for the correct sequence. But what if the architects built a test instead of a machine? He folded his arms, considering my words more seriously than I expected. A test for what? I don't know yet. Then jumped to conclusions. I am not. I am trying not to. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Beyond the transparent barrier, the quantum core continued its endless rotation, untouched by 5,000 years of effort. The recess ended with the soft chime of the council bell. Delegates returned to their seats, carrying fresh confidence despite another morning without progress. As I watched them settle into place, an uncomfortable certainty began forming in my mind. They weren't trapped because they lacked intelligence. They were trapped because every generation had inherited the same starting point. If the first assumption was wrong, then 5,000 years of brilliant science had only carried the galaxy farther down the wrong path. The afternoon session resumed with renewed determination, though nothing around me suggested the outcome would be any different from the morning. Another distinguished scientist approached the platform, introduced by a title so long that the translator condensed it into a single sentence. His civilization had devoted nearly 8 centuries to studying the quantum core. Around the chamber, respectful silence settled over the delegates as another elaborate projection filled the air with glowing equations and rotating geometric models. For 40 minutes he explained his reasoning. Every formula was internally consistent. Every prediction matched observations collected across thousands of years. When he finally activated the simulation, the energy rings surrounding the core brightened for an instant before fading once more into their familiar, tranquil glow. The sphere neither accelerated nor acknowledged the attempt. It simply continued turning, indifferent to another masterpiece of scientific effort. The scholar bowed with quiet dignity and returned to his seat. No disappointment crossed his face. He accepted failure as naturally as breathing. That was the moment something finally clicked in my mind. The quantum core wasn't defeating them. Their own expectations were. Each civilization inherited the research of those before it. Every generation refined the same theories, expanded the same mathematical language, and reinforced the same assumptions. Over thousands of years those assumptions had become untouchable. They were no longer ideas to examine. They were foundations no one dared disturb. I opened my notebook and drew a simple square. Inside it I wrote one word: assumptions. Then I drew an arrow pointing outside the square. Nothing else. I stared at the sketch for several seconds. The answer, if one existed, probably wasn't hidden deeper inside the existing framework. It might exist somewhere entirely beyond it. As the moderator called for the next presentation, I felt an unfamiliar confidence growing inside me. I still had no solution, no equations, and certainly no proof. But for the first time all day, I believed I understood the real obstacle. 5,000 years of failure had never convinced the galaxy to question its starting point. Maybe solving the quantum core wouldn't require a greater mind. Maybe it would simply require someone willing to begin somewhere no one else had ever thought to look. The next presentation barely registered in my mind. I watched the speaker gesture toward floating equations while my notebook remained open on a page containing only a single square and one word: assumptions. It looked almost childish compared to the sophisticated mathematics surrounding me, yet it represented the first truly different idea I had encountered all day. Everyone else was trying to improve the answer. I was beginning to wonder whether the question itself had been wrong from the very beginning. As another activation sequence failed, the moderator thanked the presenter and invited comments from the delegates. One after another, respected scientists suggested refinements. Increase the energy input, adjust the quantum phase, recalculate the resonance field. Their proposals differed in detail, but every suggestion rested on the same invisible foundation. None of them challenged the belief that the quantum core had to be forced open by discovering the correct combination of variables. I looked toward my father. "They, repolishing the same key," I whispered. He gave me a cautious look. "Meaning? They all believe their SA locked door. And you don't, I don't even know if their SA door." For a brief moment, he said nothing. Then he quietly replied, "Be very careful with ideas that sound simple. Sometimes they, brilliant. Sometimes they, simply incomplete. I know, but you, still thinking about it. I can, stop." The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the quantum core completed another slow rotation. The shifting symbols on its surface aligned for only a fraction of a second before dissolving into a new arrangement. I felt as though the machine was inviting observation rather than resisting examination. It wasn't behaving like an obstacle. It was behaving like a puzzle designed by someone who expected the solver to notice a hidden pattern instead of applying greater force. The realization sent a chill through me. If I was right, then 5,000 years of failure had never been about intelligence. It had been about perspective. And for the first time since arriving at Apex Nexus, I seriously considered raising my hand. My heartbeat grew louder with every passing second. Around me sat beings whose civilizations had measured history in millennia. Some had built empires before humans had learned to shape bronze. Others had written scientific laws that entire sectors still considered sacred. I was a 17-year-old student carrying a notebook with a single sketch inside it, and somehow I felt as though that empty page contained more possibility than every presentation I had watched throughout the day. The moderator glanced across the chamber after another failed demonstration. "Are there any final observations before we conclude today's session?" Several delegates lowered their eyes to their notes. Others quietly exchanged comments with neighboring researchers. No one appeared eager to speak. They had exhausted another day's worth of theories without moving any closer to activating the quantum core. I swallowed. My father noticed immediately. "No," he whispered before I had moved a muscle. I looked at him. "You know what I am thinking." "I do. I only want to ask a question. And that question could offend scientists who have devoted centuries to this research." "I am not trying to offend anyone. I know, Ethan." His voice remained calm, but I recognized the warning beneath it. "This council respects curiosity," he continued softly, "yet it respects experience even more. If you speak, choose your words carefully." I nodded, though my mind was already racing ahead. The chamber waited in expectant silence. My eyes drifted once more to the quantum core. The ancient sphere continued its graceful rotation, untouched by applause, disappointment, or ambition. It did not seem to care who stood before it, emperor or student, elder scholar or newcomer. Everyone received exactly the same response. Nothing, unless. A strange thought crossed my mind. What if silence was the response? What if everyone had mistaken the absence of activation for failure when it was actually information? The realization struck me so suddenly that I almost stood without thinking. Instead, I gripped the edge of my seat and forced myself to breathe. If I was going to challenge 5,000 years of accepted thinking, I couldn't begin with an answer. I had to begin with the right question. The silence stretched across the chamber. No one rose from their seat. The council was already preparing to conclude another fruitless day when I realized that if I stayed quiet now, they would still be debating the same equations 1,000 years from today. Slowly, I raised my hand. A ripple of surprise moved through the enormous hall. The moderator turned toward my section before checking the participant registry. Request to address the council. Observer attached to the human delegation. Identification confirmed. Ethan Parker, 17 standard years of age. Soft laughter spread through the audience. A human student? Someone whispered. He likely wishes to ask a question, another replied. The moderator nodded. Young representative of Earth, the council grants you 2 minutes. I walked calmly to the central platform. Hundreds of eyes followed every step. Before me stood the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy. Beings whose civilizations had devoted entire ages to solving the mystery of the quantum core. I took a slow breath. Forgive me if my question sounds too simple. Several delegates smiled with quiet amusement. But why are you all so certain the quantum core needs to be activated? The chamber fell completely silent. I continued before anyone could interrupt. Every one of your theories begins with the same assumption. That the core is inactive. That it must be turned on. That somewhere there is a correct key waiting to be discovered. But who actually proved any of that? Several scholars exchanged uncertain glances. What if, I said more quietly, the core has been functioning exactly as its creators intended all along? What if the architects didn't build a machine to activate, but a test? And the first requirement of passing that test is abandoning the wrong question. The silence lingered for several long seconds. Then someone laughed. Another joined in. Within moments, laughter echoed throughout the chamber. 5,000 years of research. Challenged by a child? Remarkable human naivete. An entertaining display of youthful confidence. I said nothing. No one noticed that, for the first time since the session had begun, the quantum core changed the rhythm of its rotation. The laughter had barely faded when the moderator thanked me for my interesting philosophical contribution and formally closed the session. Delegates dispersed in clusters, still smiling as they discussed the absurdity of a teenager questioning 5,000 years of established science. My father caught up with me outside the chamber. You certainly made an impression. Not the one I wanted. No, he admitted, but sometimes that's unavoidable. As we walked through the endless corridors of Apex Nexus, my communicator vibrated. Incoming priority transmission. The sender was unfamiliar. I accepted the call. A calm face appeared on the display, dressed in the dark uniform of the United Earth Scientific Command. Ethan Parker? Yes, my name is Commander Logan Hayes, Executive Science Officer aboard the USS Horizon. We monitored today's council session. I blinked. You were watching? Every second. I expected criticism. Instead, Hayes smiled. You asked the first original question we've heard in decades. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The council laughed. They allowed to. You don't think I am wrong? I think you challenged an assumption. Scientists are supposed to do that. He leaned slightly closer to the camera. We spent the last 20 years studying the quantum core independently. Not because we believed we could solve it before the council, but because we weren't convinced the council was asking the right question. My heart skipped a beat. You've been researching it, in secret? We prefer the word, independently. The bridge of the horizon appeared behind him, filled with engineers and analysts working quietly at their stations. We would like your permission to test your hypothesis. My hypothesis? I repeated. You suggested the core is not a machine waiting to be activated, but an examination waiting to be understood. I don't even know if that's true. Hayes nodded. Neither do we. He paused for a moment before adding the words that changed everything. But unlike the council, we're willing to find out. An encrypted data channel opened on my display. Attached was a single file labeled Project Horizon, Quantum Core Observation Archive. For the first time that day, I realized humanity had not come to Apex Nexus unprepared. We had been watching the core long before anyone knew we were paying attention. Less than 3 hours later, I was standing inside Hangar 7 of Apex Nexus, staring at the largest human vessel I had ever seen. The USS Horizon did not resemble the elegant ships of the elder civilizations. It was angular, heavily armored, and built with obvious practicality. Nothing about its design suggested prestige. Everything about it suggested endurance. Commander Logan Hayes met us at the airlock. Welcome aboard. My father looked around the massive engineering deck. I wasn't aware humanity had authorization to conduct independent research on the quantum core. We don't. Hayes replied calmly. We have permission to observe. The research was our own decision. No one seemed embarrassed by that admission. The bridge was unlike the council's magnificent chambers. There were no ceremonial robes or floating monuments. Scientists, engineers, mathematicians, psychologists, linguists, and software specialists worked side by side, arguing openly while data streamed across dozens of displays. Hayes led us into a circular analysis room. At its center floated a perfect holographic reconstruction of the quantum core. We watched it continuously for 22 Earth years, he said. The room became silent. 22 years? My father repeated. Hayes nodded. The council searched for ways to activate it. We ignored activation entirely. He touched the console. Thousands of recordings appeared around the hologram. Every rotation, another command. Every energy fluctuation, another. Every change in frequency, timing, geometry, and symbol arrangement. I stared at the impossible amount of information. You recorded everything? We didn't know what would matter. Hayes smiled slightly. So we assumed all of it might. He turned toward me. When you asked why everyone believed the core needed to be activated, something finally connected. The hologram stopped rotating. For the first time, I could study the symbols without motion blurring them together. They aren't random, I whispered. No, they repeat. Yes, they re-communicating. Hayes folded his arms. That is our conclusion. He zoomed in on one sequence. The council believed these patterns were encryption. He zoomed out again. We believe they re-language. Every scientist in the room looked at the hologram in complete silence. No one spoke the obvious conclusion. If the quantum core was speaking, then for 5,000 years, the galaxy had never actually tried listening. No one in the analysis room spoke for several minutes. The holographic quantum core rotated silently while the symbols flowed across its surface in repeating sequences. Once Hayes had suggested they were linguistic rather than mathematical, it became impossible for me to see them any other way. Patterns I had dismissed as decorative now resembled grammar. Certain groups always appeared together. Others never did. Some repeated with perfect regularity, while others emerged only after thousands of cycles. Encrypting information, I whispered. Hayes nodded. It's structuring it. A linguist stepped forward. We compared the sequences against more than 18 million known communication systems. Nothing matched, because, another researcher replied, we assumed we were translating a message. Hayes looked at me, and perhaps we've been reading the first page before learning the alphabet. He touched the console. The rotation of the hologram slowed until a single sequence remained suspended in the air. This pattern appears at the beginning of every complete cycle. Another followed, and this one always appears at the end. I stared at them, like punctuation. Exactly. A programmer entered several commands. Instead of searching for equations, the computer began grouping symbols according to frequency, position, and repetition. The display reorganized itself almost instantly. Clusters emerged, then relationships, then structure. The room became unnaturally quiet. A notification appeared across the central screen. Consistent syntactic framework detected. No one celebrated. No one even smiled. Every scientist understood what that sentence meant. For 5,000 years, the greatest civilizations in existence had been trying to unlock a machine. In less than 4 hours, humanity had demonstrated that the quantum core was almost certainly a language. Hayes exhaled slowly. We don't need more power. He looked around the room before finishing the thought. We need to answer. The words settled over us like gravity itself. For the first time in recorded history, the objective was no longer to activate the quantum core. It was to begin a conversation with the civilization that had built it. And somewhere inside that silent sphere, after 5 millennia of patient waiting, something appeared to be listening. The first reply was not transmitted through sound or light. It appeared as a single new sequence on the surface of the quantum core, one that had never been recorded before. The room remained silent as the translation model completed its analysis. Response accepted. No celebration followed. The quantum core unfolded, revealing an immense archive left by the architects, knowledge, history, and the map of a gateway network that had connected the galaxy long before recorded civilization. For 5,000 years, the archive had never been locked. It had simply been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Months later, the Galactic Science Council formally acknowledged humanity's contribution. Commander Logan Hayes declined every proposal to place Earth at the head of the project. We didn't solve it because we were smarter, he said. We solved it because we were willing to doubt our first assumption. That sentence became the first lesson taught to every future researcher studying the legacy of the architects. Sometimes the greatest discovery is not the answer. It is realizing that everyone has been asking the wrong question.